Okay, welcome to my 7th talk today. In my previous talk, we discussed the legend concerning the creation of man. In my talk today, I would have spoken on the 5 parts or religious components that make up man, a word I'm using in a generic sense as it is used in the text. However, upon receiving emails from some of the participants who said that as the Shahanshai MUKTADS were due to begin on the 6th of August, why don't I reschedule the theme and instead talk about the 10-day MUKTAD festival? They then suggested that I go back to the earlier schedule linked to the 5 parts of man, which is now scheduled for the 8th of August 2020. Today's presentation then is titled Visitations from the World Above, MUKTADS, the Festival of Hamaspathmaedaya, a big Avestan word, the meaning of which we are unsure of. MUKTAD is a Sanskrit word which entered the Parsi Gujarati usage when the famous priest Naryosang Daval in the 10th century CE translated the word Ashonam Fravashinam as Muktatmana Vruddhi. Over a period of time, the word Muktatmana was conjugated to Muktad, meaning salvation or release. The Persian equivalent for Muktad is Fravardigan, which means a celebration in honor of the Fravashis or Fravahars in Persian, or the guardian spirits. So it's actually a festival, and it's not something that we should be somber about. The Fravashis or Fravahars have an entire chapter, Yash 13, Fravadin Yash, dedicated to them. It's one of the long prayers that we have. The Fravashi or Fravahar is the highest 5th spiritual component of man and is seen as the guardian spirit or the essence of God in each one of us. I'll be talking much more about the Fravashi in my next talk. Both the soul and the Fravashi I'll be discussing extensively in my next talk. There is also a collective spirit or Fravashi for each of the other 5 creations, namely the sky, waters, earth, plants, animal, which they dutifully look after. They are depicted as winged divinities that fly down from the world above when invoked by Zoroastrians who request their help. Yash 13 verse 70. It is stated in the Fravadin Yash that the Fravashis help and assist human beings in a number of different ways, and the Fravashis of the living are deemed to be stronger than the Fravashi of those who have died. Yash 13 verses 15 and 17. This is an important point to bear in mind, that our Fravashis are stronger than those who have passed over. What do I have to say about the soul? In Avestan, Urvan and Pahlavi Ruvan is the spiritual preceptor or tutor or the principal agent that directs the body. The soul is responsible for the sum total of one's individual good and bad thoughts, words, and deeds generated during one's physical lifetime on earth. The soul is depicted to be the decision maker of every thought, word, and deed in the life of a Zoroastrian. So the soul, in effect, plays a very, very, very important role in the life of a Zoroastrian. During the MUKTAD festival, all the spirits come down from the spiritual world, and the souls come down from both heaven and hell in order to mingle with their family and friends. For the souls in hell, it's a once-a-year visit for 10 days, when they are, as it were, released from the abyss of hell to enjoy for the 10 days the hospitality and the spiritual togetherness with the living. However, a righteous soul can visit the living throughout the year when invoked ritually in any religious ceremony. According to the Pravardin Yasht, both the souls and the Fravashis come into the physical world to enjoy friendship and camaraderie with their family and friends. In fact, they ask, quote, "Who will praise us? Who will worship us? Who will sing hymns to us? Who will propitiate us with the hand containing meat, gaumata, and garments, vastravata, with the highest praise? Or which of us will be praised by name? Of which of you will be the soul be worshipped? To whom will the gift be given, who may have everlasting food forever?" Yasht verse 13, verse 50. In a later verse it is said, quote, "We worship here the life, intelligence, soul, and Fravashi of the righteous men and women, of the Pyrotekeshas, the first teachers, and the first acceptors of the religion who fought with triumph for righteousness." Yash 13, verse 149. This verse really says it all as far as the MUKTADS are concerned. So in the MUKTAD ritual, the Fravashis are invoked, worshipped, and praised through a number of different rituals linked to the celestial divinities. Likewise, food and clothing are offered by way of a gift in remembrance of them. The food is cooked with strict laws of purity being observed, with breakfast, mid-morning lunch, and an evening meal prepared for them by specially appointed Zoroastrian cooks and partaken by the living before the sun sets. These meals are known as stooms, Gujarati satums, which we shall discuss later. The setting up of a MUKTAD room in India normally takes place in a fire temple, whereas in Iran, the Fravardigan festival is celebrated at home. Interestingly, similarly in Udvada, at the Holy Iransha, no MUKTAD tables are placed, and the MUKTAD festival, like in Iran, is performed in individual priestly homes. In the past, many Parsi homes had a MUKTAD room where the 10-day festival was celebrated. And even today, if one can maintain the laws of purity and be careful in all the observances, then the 10-day festival can be celebrated at home, and I shall be going into this later on in my talk. So what are the ceremonies performed in a fire temple by the priests? In other words, what happens in a traditional MUKTAD ceremony performed and done in India? During the MUKTAD festival, the activities in the fire temple are greatly heightened, with the laity and the priests interacting mainly between the hours of 6 a.m. and 12 noon. It is on Ashishwang Rouge, which is day 25 of the Zoroastrian calendar month, that the whole of the fire temple is cleaned thoroughly with well water, and the clean, newly painted MUKTAD stands or tables are arranged in the hall. A 3- or 4-legged stand must be made of metal, and each leg of the table is connected with the other with intersecting metal rods a few inches above the base of the floor. A rectangular or circular marble is placed on the stand, creating a platform. On the marble top, a silver or a German silver vase is placed upside down before the start of the MUKTADs. The name of the deceased, as well as the day, month, and year of the dead, is etched on the base or the rim of the vase to particularize it. A name tag is tied on one of the legs of the stand in order for the living to identify the table on which the family vase has been placed. An oil lamp, preferably, and this is important, of clarified butter, Gujarati ghee, is placed on the table besides the vase or vases. Similarly, a 4-meter washed and consecrated length of white cotton cloth with a koshti, referred to collectively as the syav, is placed in a small metal tray on the table. The cloth length is first hand-washed with well water, dried in the sun, and then consecrated during a barge ritual in memory of the departed soul who is supposed to wear the garment symbolically. After the festival, this shav is taken by the priest or is given by way of charity to a poor person to stitch sudres. There is also something known as the akhansyav, comprising of 10 items which are consecrated in the first year muktad after a person has died. It consists of a sudre, a kushti, a padan, which is a mouth veil, leggings like a pajama, a topi, a long strip of cloth 4 or 5 inches in width, which is used for the priest's turban, a pair of white socks, a jamo, which is a white robe worn by the priest, and a pichori, a kamarband or a waist belt, which a Zoroastrian priest ties round his robe. Just before dawn breaks on Ashtad Roj, the first Muktad day, all the vases are turned upright and filled to the brim with well water, and sweet-scented flowers are placed in the vases by team of Muktad helpers. Oil lamps are lit on each table. The syav is placed on the table, and the format of prayers begin with the priest first reciting the barge of Ardifravash, comprising mainly verses from Yasnas 3 to 8, followed by the breakfast stoom ritual. Please bear in mind that I'm not a priest, but I've gone into some details to give you a flavor of the kind of rituals and prayers that are obviously said during the Muktad days. Members of the laity begin to arrive soon after dawn to witness and experience these ceremonies about to be performed by a string of priests. The barge is deemed to be an inner ritual and can only be done by a priest endowed with ritual power, amal, in the fire temple. Well water is used to purify all the utensils and metal ritual implements which will be used by the priests. The barge of Ardifravash is performed in honor of the righteous Fravashis of Fravahars. The Shnuman of Fravardin is recited by the priest, followed by the Pazan Diboche prayer of Humata Hukta Havarashta in tone, that means prayed silently while he is praying, in which the names of the deceased are remembered 3 times. During this ritual, 4 unleavened round breads, 9 centimeters in diameter and 5 millimeters in thickness, known as drones or darun in Gujarati, are consecrated. 2 drones have 9 cut marks in 3 rows on it to represent the 9,000-year Gumazician period of the apocalyptic tradition that we've talked of earlier. The other 2 unmarked breads, known as frasast, are also consecrated. Both the drones and the frasast are smeared with a dollop of clarified butter, and a few grains of pomegranate are placed on each of the drones and the frasast. At a certain point of the ritual, the priest breaks a tiny piece of bread smeared with clarified butter with a grain of pomegranate, and he tastes it by lifting his mouth veil, the padan. The tasting is known as taking chashni. In other words, through the tasting of the bread with the clarified butter and a grain of the pomegranate, the plant and the animal worlds are brought symbolically into the ritual by this act of tasting. Interestingly, on the Muktad table itself, all the 7 creations are represented, and this might be of interest to all of you. The metal stand is under the guardianship of Sherevar. The water in the vase is under the guardianship of Khordad. The earth is represented by the marble top and is under the guardianship of Spendarmad. The plant world of flowers is under the guardianship of Amardad. The animal world is represented by the clarified butter or oil of the Divo, and is under the guardianship of Baman, and man is represented by the name of the deceased on the vase, who is under the guardianship of Hormazd. The last creation of fire is represented by the flame of the Devo under the guardianship of Ardibesht. So all the 7 Amesha and the 7 creations that are so important in our Zoroastrian theology are actually represented on the Muktad table. In the center of the room, close to the Muktad table, a fire vase is placed and is duly cared for by the priests, who ensure that it is kept burning for all the 10 days of the Muktads. After the Baj of Ardafravash, the early morning stoom ritual is performed, and breakfast dishes which have been prepared are placed in a circular tray, which is put on a 3-legged metal stand known as an anni, and this stand is also placed near another continuously burning fire. The breakfast dishes are usually prepared by women of the priest's household who follow the strict laws of purity. The breakfast dishes include a variety of food offerings. Maybe this will bring about a sense of belonging, such as a cup of tea, eggs, sweet semolina, in other words, ravo, salted liver, chapats, sweet pancakes for the soul and the spirits of the departed to enjoy the fragrance of the food symbolically. Today, unfortunately, in our fire temples in India, the food does not have a particular fragrance to it, but in the old days, certainly a bevy of dishes used to be cooked, so the fire temple would really have the fragrance of a good old-fashioned Parsi kitchen. The Stum no Kardo, which is Yasna 26, is recited in praise and worship of the spirits and souls of the departed. The priest recites, quote, "We worship the good, strong, beneficent Fravashis of the righteous. We worship the life-conscious, intelligence, souls, and the Fravashis of righteous men and women. We worship here these souls of the departed ones who belong to the Fravashis of the righteous. We worship the Fravahars of the teachers." Stum no Kardo, verses 3, 4, 7, and 8. During the Gatha days, in the ritual of the Stum prayer, the names of all the 5 Gathas are remembered and taken, as the 30 days of the last calendar month have ceased to exist due to the inclusion of these 5 Gatha days. In other words, during the 5 Gatha days, you cannot mention the Spendarmat month because the Spendarmat month is over. The 30 days are over, and the 5 days are 5 extra days, making it a solar 365-day calendar. So the 5 days do not, in that sense, form part of the 12 months of the Zoroastrian calendar year. The next part of this ceremony is when the priest intones in Baj the Pazan prayers, which are sandwiched between 2 Avestan sections. Now, when I say intone, what do I mean by that? When you do your regular prayers, you will recite a prayer aloud. Then in your prayer book, it will say recite mentally or recite in tone. The reason it says that is because the intone part of the prayer is in the second language, Pazan or Pahlavi. And then it again is followed by an Avestan section. So the Pahlavi verse, as it were, is sandwiched between 2 Avestan sections, and therefore the meter of Pahlavi being different from Avestan, one intones in Baj. It's not that the priest is trying to skip the prayers, it's something that is done to indicate that the priest from the recitation of Avestan is moving into Pahlavi stroke Pazan and then goes back into Avestan. So this part of the recitation of the prayer, when it's done silently, intoned in Baj, in this the priest declares the city in which the stum is being performed, followed by the names of noble ancestors from Zoroastrian history, such as names of the family members of Spitama Zarathustra, the venerable priests, such as Mobed Shapur and Mobed Sheriar. The kings, such as Shah Gostasp and Shah Lorasp. Thereafter, the names of the deceased members of the family are taken 3 times in a set hierarchical order. Our Amastha and all the bright and glorious Hamaspathmaedayas are also invoked, and towards the end of this ritual, traditionally, the name of the family member who has requested this ritual to be performed is taken. Traditionally, it always used to be just one name which was given in the Farmoyesh, and that name traditionally always happened to be that of the patriarch, the living patriarch of the family. Today, of course, a whole list of names are given, both of men as well as women. Again, the Avestan portion begins with the words, Vispau Fravasho Ashonam, of all the Fravashis of the righteous, and the ritual ends with the Kerfe Most prayer. The Stoom ritual takes approximately 15 minutes to recite, and the breakfast food which is consecrated is eaten by the priests, his family members, and the Zoroastrian helpers of the fire temple. The same formula of prayers is recited for the mid-morning and the late evening Stoom ceremonies. The last Stoom ceremony, however, must be done before the sun sets. The Stoom offering is meant to traditionally always have a meat dish and a sweet dish for the departed souls and spirits to enjoy. As I've said earlier, Zoroastrianism is a strongly non-veg tradition, a non-veg religion. I've given you references all the way from the Gathas, expressing and showing you all how the concept of meat comes in as an item, because we do not see a difference between the animal world and the plant world. Next, in the fire temple, the Afrinagan is performed, normally that we refer to as a jashan, generally with 2 priests. This part of the ceremony is undertaken by a priest known as a Zautar and his assistant, who is known as the Raspi. The Afrinagan recited for the first 5 days of the MUKTADS comprise of 3 parts, or 3 kardas, dedicated to Arda Fravash, Daman, and Srosh, followed by the Afrins to Arda Fravash, Borzogan, and the Haft Ameshaspans. On Ruse Marespand, which is the second last day of the Zoroastrian calendar month, an additional 4th karda dedicated to Dinbe Minoe Marespand is recited. I'm giving you important technical details. Perhaps many priests don't do this, but I'm sharing with you what is the correct procedure to follow. During the 5 Gatha days for the Afrinagan ceremony, the kardas of Gambar, Gatha, and Srosh are recited, followed only by the Afrin of Gambar. On each day, the names of the deceased are recited from a list in the family Namgrahan notebook, which is kept by the Pantki, or the head priest of the fire temple. During this Afrinagan ceremony, some fruits, including a cut pomegranate, sweet savories, are blessed by the Zautar. The 4 drones already consecrated in the Bad ceremony are placed with the other offerings in the Afrinagan ritual. In this ceremony, the chief priest, the Zautar, while reciting each karda, exchanges 7 flowers with his assistant, the Raspi, similar to the exchange which takes place during a regular Jashan ceremony. According to the oral tradition, the Raspi takes on the role of representing the 7 Hamaspathmaedayas symbolically, with the 7 flowers held by him, which are given to him by the Zautar while praying each karda. These flowers are returned to the Zautar at the end of each karda. This exchange of flowers is repeated 3 times, obviously once in each karda. The role of the Zautar is to bless all the fruits and offerings, which include milk and wine. With the metal tong, Gujarati chipyo, he first passes over the 4 cardinal points over the beaker of water, up, down, right, left, and then with his tongue, he touches all the items in his tray, and as a final act, in order to complete the spiritual circuit, he touches the tips of his tongue to the rim of the fire vase. This gesture is a spiritual offering of all the items he has previously touched, which is then symbolically given to the fire, which in turn permeates it through to the other 6 creations of our Master. So in a sense, if you like, this is ritual magic that the Zautar undertakes in terms of consecrating and blessing the fruits as well as blessing the food that has been placed in the Afrinagan ceremony. On the completion of this part of the ritual, 2 priests exchange a ritual handshake and recite Hamzor Hama Ashobed. May you be one in strength and righteousness. Thereafter, the Zautar recites 3 Afrins, and towards the last part of the 3rd Afrin, on the words Daman Kepam in Miasfraz Rasid Hend, that is the pious ones who have come to this celebration, the Raspi joins in, and both the priests pray in unison, ending with the words Yathanam Vahuman Mahi. As the Afrinagan comes to a close, the priest intones 21 Yatha Ahuverio and 12 Ashem Vahu, and the unit of the 4-fold prayers, the Ammairascha, Hazengram, Jasme Avange Master, and the Kerfe Maus prayer, is followed by the Dua Tandrusti prayer, which is recited for the well-being, good health, and prosperity of the living. In a sense, the Zautar, through prayers, brings about, I've said this earlier, but I want to stress the point, that he brings about the magic of the spiritual world to consecrate the fruits and other offerings. So the fruits which are consecrated, if the jashan is done really properly and well, I promise you begin to taste different to fruits that are otherwise taken from the same basket. The fragrance of the chasni is enjoyed by the souls and spirits of those who have been invoked through the ritual. Upon the completion of the ceremony, the fruits and other offerings are eaten by the laity as chashni, generated through the enactment of the Afrinagan ceremony. The Afrinagan lasts for about 45 minutes to an hour, depending upon the speed at which the priests pray, and is performed on each day of the MUKTADS. The next ritual which is done is the Faroksi, which is a ritual dedicated again to the Fravashis and involves the recitation of the Fravadin Yasht, which is performed by the priest in the fire temple. Pretty much the whole of the Fravadin Yasht is recited in the Farokshi. In this ceremony, the Dibache of Stumno Kardo is recited, followed by the recitation of the Fravadin Yash, as I just mentioned, wherein a long list of names of Fravashis and souls of illustrious Zoroastrian ancestors are remembered. It begins with naming the Fravashis of Zarathustra, of Vishtaspa, of Jamaspa, the sons of Zarathustra, Zarathustra's wife, and other notables, comprising the names of kings, priests of old, heroes and warriors who are all invoked and remembered. In the final part of the Farokshi, the names of the deceased family members are taken from the Nam Grahan book. This ceremony is also recited every day during the MUKTADS and takes again around 45 minutes to an hour if recited fully. All the 4 sets of ceremonies are repeated during the 5 intercalary Gatha days. However, in the Afrinagan ceremony performed during the 5 Gatha days, 3 Kardas are recited, and they are of Gambar, Gatha and Srosh, followed by the Afrin of the Gambar. In the earlier section, if you remember, it was Ardha Fravash, Daman and Sarosh. Here it's Gambar, Gatha and Srosh. On the last watch of the fifth Gatha day, at some time around 3 o'clock in the morning, remember the Zoroastrian day starts with dawn, not at 12 midnight. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, the final barge of Gatha is celebrated in the fire temple, followed by an Afrinigan. And in this Afrinigan, the Kardas of Ardha Fravash, Gatha and Srosh are followed by the Afrins of Ardha Fravash, Borzogan and Haft Ameshaspan. In other words, there's a blending where Ardha Fravash comes in as well as the Gatha comes in for this final Afrinigan. After the Afrinigan, the Farokshi is recited and it follows the same earlier format of prayers. Thereafter, a final Stum ceremony is performed. The Stum food, in a sense, is linked to the journey back to the spiritual worlds from when the souls and Fravashis have come from. Therefore, a dry hamper with sweet dishes prepared for the return journey of all the Fravashis and the souls. After all these rituals are completed and the spirits and souls are bade farewell, the team of fire temple helpers remove the flowers and discard the water from the vases, which are turned upside down on the table, as a gesture to mark the departure of all the Fravashis who were invited for the festival. This happens on the fifth Gatha day before dawn breaks, before Hormuz Roj begins. So it's in the early hours of the morning that the fire temple helpers have to do this. The oil lamps are extinguished and all is cleared from the Muktad hall in order to welcome community members on Hormuz Ruz Fravadinma, the New Year day, at the break of dawn. Now, an important point that I want to talk on is Pateti. It is erroneous to wish people Pateti Mubarak because the word Patet means repentance, and I don't think it's particularly appropriate to wish somebody happy repentance. So what then is Patet? In Avestan, it's Paitit, means repentance, and a small time frame of about an hour only is allocated for the recitation of the Patet Pashimani prayer just before dawn breaks. So it's not a one-day celebration, it's not all of the fifth Gatha day, it's literally 1 hour, assuming that you don't have too much to repent about. If one is at home, after bathing, one does the Padyap Kushti, recites the Srosh Baj and the Ushahinga prayers, because remember we're still in the fifth Gatha day, followed by the Patet Pashimani prayer, in which one repents for all the sins committed during the year which is about to end. Therefore, as I said earlier, wishing Pateti Mubarak is totally inappropriate. Now, coming to a practical part of my talk, I'm going to explain to you what are the prayers that the laity can recite and what in fact can you actually do by way of doing the MUKTADS at home, particularly those of you who are abroad who do not have the facilities of fire temples to go to, etc. I think this part will be of particular interest to you all. So the prayers to be recited by the laity during the Muktad days at the fire temple or at home. Okay, there was some problem with the recording. The prayers to be recited by the laity during the Muktad days at the fire temple or at home. One does the Padyabe Koshti. The simple explanation for that is you untie your Koshti with the Kemna Master, you retie it with the Hormuz Khodai, you recite the Jasame Avange Master prayer, and you might like to recite the Dua Tandurusti prayer with it. One then prays the Srosh Baj, the relevant Ga prayer, which would be Ushain Ga. In the morning, this would be Havan Ga as far as the new day is concerned. Then one does the Farziyat prayers, such as the Khojeste P, the Dua Nam Setoeshne, Vispa Humata, Char Disanu Namaskar, then the Atash Nioesh prayer, and then importantly, the From Mount Noha, which is Yasna 20, is recited during the first 5 Muktad days. That means from Ashtad Roj to Aniran Roj. Or if you don't recite the From Mount Noha, you recite 1200 Hashem Vahus can be prayed instead. Then on each of the Gatha days, each Gatha is recited. And if one cannot recite each Gatha on the specific Gatha day, then 1200 Yatha Ahuvarios may be recited on each Gatha day. For those of you who perform the Stum ceremony at home, which you can do, you recite the Stum Nokardo, and finally you recite the Dua Tandrusti for the living. Now, let me share with you what are the things that you can basically do at home. In the last watch of Ushain Ga, an hour before dawn, on the eve of New Year's Day, maintaining a state of ritual purity, a Devo should be lit at home. The Padyap Koshti should be done, and the Srosh Baj, Ushain Ga, and the Patet Pashimani prayers should be recited. This is all done at home. Earlier on I said what happens in the fire temple when many Zoroastrians in India visit the fire temple at 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the morning. But if you're doing it at home, this is the format that you need to follow. As dawn breaks, one should redo the Padyap Koshti and recite the Hushbam prayer to welcome the new day, and then pray the Dua Tandrusti prayer for the family to bring in New Year Day. If one cannot celebrate the Muktad in a fire temple, and if one wishes to remember the near and dear ones, then the following items and ceremonies should be replicated at home. A room or an area needs to be cleared and cleaned thoroughly, and the ritual laws of purity must be observed strictly during the 10-day Muktad festival. A metal stand with a stone top needs to be used as the Muktad table. I'm telling you what should be done properly. If you take shortcuts, that's up to you, but these things can be adjusted, but I'm telling you what the right thing would be to do. On the Muktad table in your home, like in the fire temple, early on Ashtad Rus, one places a clean metal vase filled with water and fresh sweet-scented flowers, a Devo using clarified butter, a siav consisting of a length of cotton fabric, or a new sadra and a kasti, a prayer book, and a list of names of all the deceased family members who are to be invoked and remembered. The oil lamp must be kept burning 24/7 during the festival, as the souls and spirits are said to gravitate towards the light of the flame and feel comfortable mingling around the Devo. Next, a variety of food cooked daily has to be prepared for the 3 Stum rituals for the spiritual guests who will be visiting during the Muktad festival. A lobandan on which one can burn incense during the recitation of the prayers is also placed on the table. Ensure that while performing the rituals at home, there are no disturbances such as phone calls. A sense of responsibility and reflection must be maintained for the ceremonies to be done properly during the 10 days. One cannot choose to do Muktads, for example, on day 1 and then take a break of a few days and restart the Muktads with the remaining days of the festival. I wouldn't recommend that. As an alternative, 2 or 3 families may get together and share the responsibilities of all that has to be done by way of prayers and ritual paraphernalia, and the MUKTADS then can be celebrated in someone's home. Khodad Sal is seen as the greater New Year, when Prophet Spitaman Zarathustra's birthday is celebrated symbolically 6 days after Nowruz. I now want to move into something which probably very few of you know, except perhaps for some of our Iranian Zoroastrian participants who have tuned in. The Iranian Fravardigan tradition. This is, as a matter of general knowledge and interest, I'm sharing this with you. My late Professor Mary Boyce has described the Fravardigan festival in great detail in her book, A Persian Stronghold of Zoroastrianism. She was invited to give the famous Ratanbhai Katrak lectures at the University of Oxford in 1975. These lectures, held every 10 years, are considered to be very prestigious and in a sense are seen as the Nobel Prize of Iranian Studies. I attended the entire series of 6 lectures when I was studying at the University of Oxford. Her observations and experiences have come from her having attended the 10-day Kadmi MUKTADS in the village of Sharifabad, Adrakan, some 80 kilometers northwest of Yazd in the early 60s, 1963 to 64. I've visited all these villages. I've actually met many of the men and women that she interacted with, and so I also have first-hand information about this. She bore witness to these ceremonies, and I'm highlighting her meticulously recorded documentation of all the local customs and ritual traditions followed by the Zoroastrian villagers of that region. The 10-day Rozan Fravardigan festival is divided into 2 sections: Panji Kasog, the lesser pentad from Ruze Ashtad to Ruze Aniran, and the Panji Mass, which is seen as the greater pentad, comprising the 5 Gatha days. In Sharifabad, it was held that the lesser pentad of Panji Kasog, that is the first 5 days of the Fravardigan festival, was when the souls and spirits of the deceased of children would specifically come down from the spirit world, whereas the Panji Mass was for all the souls, including those from hell, who were allowed to come annually during the Fravardigan festival. Obviously, adult souls would also come on the first 5 days, but it was particularly significant, according to the villagers, of the souls of children who had died, who would come and bless their near and dear ones for the first 5 days. On Ruze Ashtad, the first of the lesser pentad, the men of the household fetched fine clay, gel, in Hessian bags to model a variety of clay figurines and animal forms. On Ruze Asman, that's the next day, the clay was wetted with clean well water by the men, and small models of camels, donkeys, and human figurines were made by the family. I've personally seen all this on one of my visits to Iran. The women of the family stitched tiny panniers, that is bags, made of cloth to put on the back of the small camel and donkey figures made of clay. Clothes were stitched by the women for the human figurines as well. On the same day, 2 small square wooden boxes were washed in running water and filled with clean soil from their farms. On Ruze Samyad, that is the 3rd day of the Fravardigan, 7 kinds of seeds were sown in the box in order for the seeds to sprout by New Year's Day, Hormuz Roj Fravardin Ma. The seeds sown were of wheat, yellow lentil, mung beans, edible barley, red beans, chickpeas, and watercress. The number 7 plays an important role and represents the 7 bounteous immortals and each of the 7 creations which are individually looked after by a bounteous immortal. On the same day, Ruse Zamyad, the house was thoroughly cleaned, including the flat roof terrace. On the 4th day, on Ruse Marespand, the ladies of the house would take a woven basket made with strips of cloth and lined with cotton wool, moistened with clean water, in which a variety of herbs were sown. According to the modern tradition as practiced in Yazd, and I've again seen this, in the basket are placed a new sudre, a kushti, murt leaves, I don't know what the English name is, sedav, that is nebula leaves, a pomegranate, cucumber, quince fruit, nabat, which is a form of sugar, and beh fruit. That's unique to that region of Iran. I don't know the English name. In a separate tray, wine, milk, and rose sherbet are placed. On Ruse Aniran, the 5th day in the early hours of the morning, the men would take the family cow or donkey to their farm, carrying 2 bags full of fine clay, brought earlier to the house. At the farm, they would add chopped straw to the clay and mix it with clean stream water, making a kind of paste, which they brought back to their home. The men would wash themselves clean, and the women would visit the home of their dastur to sip a small amount of nirang. Yes, even in Iran, nirang was sipped in those days to wash away their impurities. They then sat about preparing the room for where the souls and fravashis of their loved ones were to be welcomed in a special room set aside for the Fravardigan called Ganza Pak. The fine clay mixture was then carefully spread across the floor of the Ganza Pak and allowed to dry. By the evening of the same day, the animal sheds were also cleaned to enable the souls and the spirit beings to mingle with the family members in a clean and purified environment. In the Ganza Pak, a large white square cloth was laid on the floor, and the white-washed animal figures and the clay figurines were placed on this white cloth in the Ganja Pak. A mirror, a fire brazier with burning embers was brought from the hearth fire, and this was also placed on the floor. A special oil lamp was lit and placed before the mirror on the floor for the light of the flame to be reflected in all directions. This oil lamp was kept burning continuously until the festival ended. Every morning and evening, boy or branch, which means fragrant and roasting, foods were prepared for the delight of the souls and the spirits, as well as for the families in the village who enjoyed each other's hospitality by being together and sharing the cooked food. I promise you the food is truly delicious. The fragrance is out of this world. The local priest would visit each house every day and was invited to perform the necessary rituals to bless the food. On the first Gatha day, no farming work was undertaken by the family. On the second Gatha day, white lime water was sprinkled on the roof of the house, while the spirit guests, they believe, stayed in the Ganza Park, the MUKTADS room, with the glow of the oil lamp burning around them. On the third day, boya branch, food for the spirits, was specially prepared in the morning for their lunch with sirog, and the eggs were cooked for them for breakfast. On the fourth Gatha day, more boya branch food was prepared, but this time the food was cooked in pure sesame seed oil. That is how precise the villagers in those days did their rituals. All the food was then taken to the Ganza Park for the fravishis and souls to enjoy the fragrance of the food. On the fifth Gatha day, 2 sheep were sacrificed, a common practice amongst the Iranian Zoroastrians to this day, and the sacrificial meat was roasted to prepare a grand meal for both the living and the dead. On this day, Nane Shekari was also made, as they believed that the young children who had died would enjoy eating this sweetened bread. In the evening of the fifth Gatha day, after the priest had finished reciting the Gambar prayers, the clay models and the 2 wooden boxes containing the sprouted seeds were placed on the terrace roof besides the clay figurines. An oil lamp was lit and a fire brazier was kept burning and fed with sweet-smelling herbs and incense. In the early morning, around 3:30 a.m. of the night of the fifth Gatha day and the early hours before New Year would set in, the family members were woken up by the women who had already lit the brushwood on the terrace. The Afrinagan of Daman was then recited by a senior member of the family, and as dawn set in, all the family members looked eastwards, waiting for the sun to rise, so as to bid farewell to the Fravashis and the souls, to wish them a safe journey back to their spiritual abodes. The children, looking skywards, would wave their hands as a farewell gesture to the honored guests from the spiritual world. I've actually seen all this personally. Upon daybreak of Ruze Hormas, the brushwood fire from the roof was taken to the fire temple in a procession by the men of the family. Thereafter, the householders did their Padyapkasti and recited the Havangar prayers to welcome New Year, Ruze Hormas Ma Fravardin, formally. The women sprinkled water with powdered marjoram leaves onto the terrace roof. The family then greeted each other and had breakfast together on the terrace of the house, drinking wine and toasting each other with good health. On Khodat Sal, known as Havzoru in Persian, the Zoroastrian villagers wore 7 new things and took 7 sips of wine. Havzoru was seen as the Greater New Year, connecting it to the ancient calendar of the 3rd century CE before King Shapur's calendar reform. The plant boxes after Havzoru were not watered, and so the sprouted shoots dried up. Their belief was that the Fravashis, who were seen allegorically as warriors, came on their horses, who in turn ate up the green sprouted tender plants, leaving the dry stubbles in the wooden box. I mean, it's quite amazing the kind of genuine feeling that they bring towards the MUKTADS ceremony. I want to just say a few words about the changes of the calendar affecting the Festival of Hamaspathmaedaya. This is a bit technical, and as I mentioned earlier, I hope all of you have a little calendar before you in case you don't know the days that I'm going to talk about. Now, in our religious calendar, there are 6 great festivals celebrated religiously by the Zoroastrians throughout the year. They fall in mid-spring, mid-summer, early autumn, mid-autumn, midwinter, and pre-spring. Each of these festivals is known as a Gambar, and except for the pre-spring one, the Gambar was celebrated for 1 day. Obviously, Hamaspathmaedaya MUKTADS is a 10-day celebration, but how did it become 10 days is what I will explain to you in a moment. The mid-spring Gambar is linked to the sky. The midsummer Gambar is linked to the waters. The early autumn Gambar is linked to the earth. The mid-autumn Gambar is linked to the plant world. The midwinter Gambar is linked to the animal world. And the pre-spring Gambar is linked to man when the festival of Hamaspathmaedaya / MUKTAD is celebrated. Now this is where it gets a bit technical. Please bear with me. It is in early Sasanian times, during the reign of King Shapur, which is 240 to 270 CE, that the 360-day religious calendar of 30 days of 12 months each was changed by the king. With the addition of 5 extra Gatha days, the old calendar by the king was transformed into a 365-day solar calendar. Hence, the Festival of Hamaspathmaedaya was celebrated for 10 days, consisting of the last 5 days of the Zoroastrian calendar month, that is from Ashtad to Aniran, and the 5 intercalary Gatha days, which were added by King Shapur in his new calendar. Now, it is important to note that the 5 Gatha days are not part of the 12th Spendarmad month. As I mentioned earlier to you all, these 5 Gatha days are extra. On that day, whatever prayers you recite, you cannot say Spendarmad Ma, because there is no Spendarmad Ma. Spendarmad Ma ended with Aniran Roj, which means that on this particular day, Gatha day, there is no question of Spendarmad Ma. The common people did not accept the king's new calendar with the 5 additional Gatha days, because for them, Gambar was a one-day festival celebrated in the 12th month from Ruse Aniran to the next day, which became New Year, namely Hormuz Roj Fravidin Ma. As the people did not accept the new calendar reform, that is, Hormuz Roj of the people's calendar was still Ashtad Roj as per the king's calendar. Ashtad Roj was day 356. Now just try and bear with me. Obviously, because the king brought in 5 extra Gatha days, the old people's calendar was 5 days ahead. So Ashtad Roj of the king's calendar was Hormuz Roj of the people's calendar. And that is how in year 2, the calendar became, the festival became a festival of 6 days. 1 day of Aniran and the 5 Gatha days, making it 6 days. Okay? However, the king, being the king, forced the people, and they said you can only celebrate New Year, Hormuz Roj Fravidin Ma, after you have celebrated the 5 Gatha days. He passed a decree. So in year 2, the festival was celebrated for 6 days. Then in year 3, a compromise was reached at the end of year 3, which was that the Hamaspathmaedaya festival of the king's calendar would start from Ashtad Roj to Aniran Roj, that is 5 days of Spendarmad Ma, and 5 Gatha days from Aunavaiti to Ushtavaiti Gatha, making it a 10-day festival. However, some Orthodox Zoroastrians saw Hormuz Roj of the king's calendar as Khordad Roj of the old calendar. Remember, I mentioned the old calendar was always 5 days ahead. So, Khordad Roj of the old calendar was 5 days ahead of the king's new calendar because of the addition of the 5 intercalary Gatha days as mentioned earlier. Khordad Roj, therefore, came to be known as Khordad Sal, or the Greater New Year, in Persian, the Havzoru celebration. And to this day, Khordad Sal is celebrated as the Greater New Year and the Prophet's birthday. Now, coming back to India, some Orthodox Zoroastrians decided to prepare for the MUKTAD festival on Ashishwang Roj, 1 day before Ashtad Roj, and ended the MUKTAD festival after Khordad Roj on Amardad Roj. So if you add up the days from Ashishwang Roj, 6 days to Aniran Roj, 5 Gatha days, which brings us to 11 days, and then 6 days from Hormuz to Khordad, you therefore end up with 18 days. In other words, if you count from Ashishwang Roj till the end of Spendarmatma, 6 days, plus 5 Gatha days, plus Hormuz Burman Arbe Sherever Spendarmat Khordad, it comes to 18 days. However, as per the ancient Pravardin Yash, the festival of Hamaspathmaedaya was always deemed to be a 10-day festival according to Yash 13 verse 49. Interestingly, whilst I was up at Oxford University, the Pravardin Yash was dated by Professor Bara, a professor of Sanskrit, to the circa 7th century BCE. That means before the Achaemenian dynasty came into existence, making it one of the oldest yashs giving information on the festival of Hamaspathmaedaya and its celebration for 10 days. In other words, the Pravardin Yash certainly talks of the MUKTAD festival to be a festival for 10 days. How it became from 1 day, 10 days to 18 days, I've just explained to you. So this more or less brings me to the end of my talk, and I hope that you are, as of today, better informed about the MUKTADS, and you will all be ready to greet the souls and Fravashi warriors as they come flying in for the MUKTADS on the 6th of August on Ashtad Ruz Spendarmat Ma. Finally, before we close, I would like to quote to you from one of my favorite verses from the Pravardin Yash, which I had to actually translate as part of my course at Oxford University. Quote, "By their brightness and glory, the waters flow, flowing forward from the never-failing springs. By their brightness and glory, the plants spring up from the earth, by their never-failing springs. By their brightness and glory, the winds driving the clouds blow from the never-failing springs." Ushtate, and thank you for listening.